They said, "I don't want to sit next to her." Those words didn't just float through the cabin. They cut through the air like a blade, loud enough for everyone to hear. Conversations stopped, heads turned, and in that frozen moment, all eyes were on the woman they were meant to embarrass. She didn't flinch. Her back was straight, her gaze calm, as if she'd been here before, as if every ounce of dignity she carried had been tested time and time again. The flight attendant shifted uneasily, trying to mediate, but the damage was already done. A stranger had just reduced her existence to a complaint, and the cabin seemed to hold its breath. What happened next wasn't rage. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the outburst they expected. It was something much more powerful. A quiet decision that would silence every whisper in that cabin and turn the entire flight upside down. This isn't a story about wealth or power. It's about what happens when a person, pushed too far, decides that no one will ever dictate where she does or doesn't belong. Stay with me, because in a matter of moments, her response will make even the most arrogant passenger rethink what it means to have a seat. Not just on a plane, but in life. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ for more gripping true stories, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from right now? I'd love to see the countries represented here. Vanessa Carter's life was never defined by privilege, yet her presence carried the quiet authority of someone who had built her world from the ground up. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, she grew up in a modest home with parents who lived for more than just themselves. Her father, Raymond Carter, was a civil rights lawyer who spent decades fighting cases no one else would take, often representing those who couldn't afford justice. Her mother, Diane, was a retired schoolteacher, a woman who believed in the power of education, grace, and resilience. From an early age, Vanessa witnessed both the unyielding beauty and the harsh realities of being Black in America. At 8 years old, she watched her father walk out the door each morning with his head held high, despite knowing that some courts and clients would treat him as less than the white attorneys he stood beside. Diane, too, carried her own wisdom. She would often sit Vanessa down and say, "There will be people who can't see past your skin, baby, but their blindness doesn't define your vision." Those lessons fueled Vanessa's ambition. She wasn't just determined to succeed. She wanted to own her space in every room she walked into. After college, she worked tirelessly, taking odd jobs, saving every cent, and teaching herself design while working late nights. What began as a few sketches and handmade pieces eventually grew into Carter Luxe, a fashion label known for bold, sophisticated designs that celebrated strength and identity. Today, her brand was worn by celebrities, displayed in high-end stores, and covered in major fashion magazines. But behind every achievement was a deeper purpose. Vanessa wasn't just building a company. She was building a legacy for her 8-year-old daughter, Chloe. Becoming a mother had reshaped the way she viewed the world. She wanted Chloe to grow up knowing her value, never questioning whether she belonged at a table or in a conversation. Vanessa often thought about how every step she took was a step her daughter wouldn't have to take alone. Raising Chloe as a single mother was both Vanessa's greatest challenge and her proudest accomplishment. Though she and Marcus, her ex-husband, shared custody amicably, Vanessa knew that the world would not always be kind to her daughter. She would look at Chloe's bright, curious eyes and think, "I have to do better, not just for me, but for her future." Success had brought Vanessa wealth, recognition, and influence, but it hadn't shielded her from the subtle, and sometimes blatant, racism that seemed to follow no matter how high she climbed. There were the quiet assumptions at luxury stores, the skeptical stares at business meetings, and the moments when her presence in spaces like first class was silently questioned. She learned to handle these moments with grace. She smiled, remained calm, and let her achievements speak louder than their ignorance. Yet deep inside, each incident left a small scar, a reminder that no matter her accomplishments, she would always be judged first by her skin before her name or title. And that was why Chloe was her anchor. Vanessa didn't want her daughter to grow up thinking this was normal, that these daily battles were just the price of being successful and Black. She wanted Chloe to see a mother who demanded respect without raising her voice, who walked with dignity even when others tried to strip it away. This flight to Los Angeles was supposed to be just another trip, a chance to finalize a deal that could elevate her brand even further. But Vanessa had no idea that in a few minutes, her calm strength would be tested in a way that would leave every passenger watching in stunned silence. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos, rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and the steady flow of passengers rushing to catch their flights. Vanessa moved through the crowd with her usual quiet confidence. She wasn't just another traveler. Every step carried the weight of someone who knew she had somewhere important to be. Today's flight to Los Angeles wasn't for leisure. It was for a high-stakes investor meeting that could shape the next phase of her company's future. She glanced at her phone, scanning through last-minute emails, mentally rehearsing the presentation she'd spent weeks perfecting. Her mind was on strategy decks, partnership contracts, and projections, not on the battle that was about to unfold at 30,000 feet. First class was supposed to offer her a rare moment of quiet, a chance to breathe, refocus, and gather her thoughts before stepping into another demanding boardroom. Vanessa's seat was by the window, second row. She placed her designer carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat, pulling out her tablet to review her notes. Everything about her demeanor was calm and professional. She was dressed elegantly, but not flamboyantly. A soft cream sweater, tailored trousers, and a slim gold bracelet Chloe had made for her as a birthday gift. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and fresh linen, the kind of luxury she had worked so hard to afford. Yet she never felt out of place here. She had earned every inch of this success. Or at least, that's how she wanted to feel, until Patricia Langford walked in. Patricia's arrival was hard to ignore. She had the kind of presence that demanded attention, not because she was particularly warm or friendly, but because she moved as if the world belonged to her. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the cabin floor as she scanned the seats, her perfectly coiffed hair and pearl necklace making her look every bit the wealthy socialite she was. And then her eyes landed on Vanessa. There was a pause, a subtle tightening of her jaw. Patricia's lips pursed as she slowed her pace, looking at the seat next to Vanessa as though something was terribly wrong. For a second, Vanessa thought maybe Patricia was lost or had mistaken her seat number. But then the expression on Patricia's face said everything. "Oh," Patricia said softly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Standards aren't what they used to be in first class, are they?" The words were coded in politeness, but laced with venom. A few nearby passengers turned their heads, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Vanessa didn't respond. She had heard comments like that before, comments meant to sting without sounding explicitly cruel. Patricia placed her designer handbag on the seat beside Vanessa, but didn't sit down. Instead, she turned to the nearest flight attendant, a young woman just starting to welcome first-class passengers. "Excuse me," Patricia began with an icy tone. "I paid for a first-class seat. I don't think this is the experience I was expecting. Can't you move me? Or move her?" The young attendant froze, clearly caught off guard, and quickly motioned for Julian Miller, the senior flight attendant. Julian, with his calm and composed demeanor, stepped forward. His presence brought a subtle shift. He had the kind of reassuring confidence that made people listen. "Good afternoon, ma'am. What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Patricia sighed, tilting her head toward Vanessa without looking at her directly. "I don't think I should have to sit here. I want to know if there's another seat available, preferably away from her." Vanessa felt the weight of every eye in that cabin press against her skin. Her hands tightened around the tablet she was holding, but her face remained neutral. Years of enduring moments like this had taught her the power of silence. She wasn't going to give Patricia the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Julian glanced at Vanessa briefly, his jaw tightening as he turned back to Patricia. "All first-class seats are taken, ma'am. Everyone here has a reserved seat, and we can't move passengers unless they request a change." Patricia's face hardened. "Are you saying I have to sit here?" "That's correct." Julian replied firmly but politely. "You're welcome to take your assigned seat, or if you prefer, we can discuss rebooking you on a later flight." The sharpness in Patricia's laugh was almost comical. "Rebook me? For this? You must be joking." Vanessa exhaled slowly, keeping her focus on the screen of her tablet, pretending to be unfazed. Inside, though, she could feel a mix of frustration and exhaustion bubbling beneath the surface. How many times had she been made to feel as if she didn't belong, even when she was paying the same as everyone else? Even when she was, by every measure, exactly where she deserved to be. Julian gave Patricia a patient but firm look, silently urging her to sit down. "We'll be departing soon. Please take your seat." Patricia muttered something under her breath, something about how things have changed and standards dropping. As she finally lowered herself into the seat beside Vanessa, she kept her handbag between them like an invisible wall. Vanessa didn't say a word. Not yet. She'd learned long ago that sometimes silence was the strongest response. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Something inside her was shifting, stirring, waiting for the right moment to remind Patricia and everyone else watching exactly who she was. The moment the seatbelt sign dinged off, Patricia leaned forward, clearly unwilling to let the matter rest. Her voice cut through the calm murmur of the first-class cabin, sharp and dismissive. "I'm telling you, I don't want to sit here. Move me, or move her." A hush fell over the rows of plush seats. The passengers around them exchanged uneasy glances, some shifting in their seats, pretending not to listen while still watching the confrontation unfold. A man across the aisle paused mid-sip of his drink, while a young couple in the row ahead subtly turned their heads to catch every word. The tension was so thick, it felt as though the entire cabin had been drawn into this exchange. Julian, the senior flight attendant, returned with the same calm composure he'd shown earlier, but his expression had hardened slightly. He crouched slightly to Patricia's eye level and repeated, "Ma'am, there are no empty first-class seats. Everyone here has paid for their seat, including this passenger. I can't move her, and I cannot move you." Patricia's response was a scoff, her hand waving dismissively toward Vanessa, as if she weren't even human. "You can't expect me to sit here all flight. This is supposed to be a premium experience. I'm not comfortable, and it's because of this." She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the meaning. The pointed glance at Vanessa's skin tone said enough. Vanessa kept her gaze fixed on the tablet in her lap, but inside her heart was pounding. Every nerve in her body told her to stand up, to speak, to shut this woman down. But she could hear her father's voice in her mind, deep, steady, and always full of wisdom. "You teach people how to treat you. If you let them define your worth, they'll believe they have the power to take it from you." Her silence wasn't a weakness. It was a calculated choice, one meant to let the moment reveal just how ugly Patricia's behavior was. Still, as she glanced at the other passengers, some looking away in discomfort, others watching with curiosity, Vanessa realized that silence could also be dangerous. People sometimes confuse silence with submission. And she was no one's victim. Julian cleared his throat and straightened. "Ma'am, I'll ask you once more. Please sit back and enjoy the flight. We will not be accommodating this request." His tone carried an edge now, a warning that his patience was wearing thin. Patricia's cheeks flushed with frustration. "Fine," she muttered, crossing her arms like a child denied her way. But even as she sat there, she kept muttering under her breath, each word dripping with disdain. "Ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. First class isn't what it used to be. You never know who they'll let in these days." Vanessa finally looked up, her eyes meeting Patricia's for the first time since boarding. There was no anger in her gaze, just a quiet strength, a challenge that said, "You will not reduce me to your prejudice." She didn't need to raise her voice to make a point. Sometimes a single look was enough to say everything. The silence between them stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. A middle-aged man in the row behind them cleared his throat, as if to break the tension. A woman 2 seats away whispered to her husband, "This is unreal." The murmurs grew, and Vanessa could feel the weight of the room pressing down on both of them. And then Patricia snapped again. "This is outrageous," she hissed, turning once more to Julian. "I'll pay for another seat, anywhere else. I don't care how much it costs, just get me away from her." The cabin went completely still. The audacity in her tone left even Julian momentarily stunned. Vanessa, however, felt something shift deep inside. It wasn't anger, it was the familiar sting of years of unspoken battles. Moments when she'd been looked at as though her success, her very presence, was an exception rather than the rule. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It wasn't about first class, legroom, or overpriced champagne. It was about every moment in her life where someone, somewhere, tried to tell her she didn't belong. Not in boardrooms, not in high-end stores, not even on an airplane seat she had paid for like everyone else. Julian's voice finally broke through. "Ma'am, this is the last time I'll address this. We're not moving any passenger. Please take your seat, or I'll have to involve the captain." Patricia's eyes narrowed, but she slumped back in her seat with a sharp exhale. Vanessa turned her gaze forward, but her mind was racing. Her father's words came back to her. "Some battles choose you, and if you don't face them, they'll haunt you." Vanessa knew this wasn't over. Something inside her whispered that a statement had to be made, not for her ego, but for every single person who had ever been treated as less. Vanessa sat there, silent but steady, feeling Patricia's presence radiating disdain like heat from a fire. Each sigh, each muttered remark, was a reminder of the unspoken war Patricia had declared the moment she laid eyes on her. But Vanessa wasn't going to sit there and let herself become the passive subject of another entitled stranger's story. No, not this time. She slowly closed her tablet and placed it in the seat pocket in front of her. The simple act of shutting it down felt symbolic. Like she was shutting down every microaggression she had endured in this space. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her movements graceful yet deliberate. Patricia's head turned sharply. "Are you leaving?" Patricia asked, her tone dripping with self-satisfaction, as if she had successfully forced Vanessa out. Vanessa's lips curled into a small, calm smile. "Not exactly," she replied softly, her voice steady enough to command the attention of everyone within earshot. She walked past Julian and the other flight attendant, her heels tapping gently on the carpeted aisle. She paused near the galley. "Excuse me," she said to Julian, her tone polite but resolute. "I need a moment to make a quick call. I'll be right back." Julian nodded, giving her a sympathetic glance. Something in her eyes told him this wasn't just about a seat anymore. Vanessa stepped just outside the cabin and pulled out her phone. She didn't hesitate. Her assistant picked up on the second ring. "Yes, Miss Carter?" "Connect me with the airline manager on duty," Vanessa said firmly. "I want every first-class seat on this flight booked under my name, now, whatever the cost." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a brief moment of shock. "All of them?" her assistant asked. "All of them," Vanessa repeated. "Do it fast, I'll hold." Within minutes, the transaction was confirmed. Tens of thousands of dollars in a single charge, but to Vanessa, the cost wasn't even a consideration. This wasn't about luxury or flexing wealth. This was about reclaiming her dignity in a way that left no room for debate. She tucked her phone back into her bag and walked calmly into the cabin, her presence drawing every eye. Julian instinctively stepped forward, sensing that something had shifted. Vanessa stopped beside Patricia's seat. The older woman glanced up, expecting to see defeat, but what she saw instead made her stiffen in confusion. "Now," Vanessa said, her voice as smooth as silk but carrying the weight of steel, "you have the entire cabin to yourself, because I own it." The words hung in the air like thunder. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The silence was sharp, the kind that presses down on you because no one knows how to respond. Then a soft murmur rippled through the passengers, followed by a single pair of hands clapping. A man in the back row, his eyes filled with quiet admiration. Soon, more hands joined in. The applause wasn't raucous or mocking, it was sincere. A collective acknowledgement of a woman who refused to be humiliated. Patricia's face turned crimson, her mouth slightly agape. She sputtered, searching for words, but none came. The handbag she'd clutched like a shield now rested limply in her lap. For the first time, Patricia looked small, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of Vanessa's unshakable composure. Julian's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "would you like anything to drink while we prepare for takeoff?" "Water, please," Vanessa replied, sitting down as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She opened her tablet again and resumed scrolling through her presentation slides, the applause fading back into the low hum of the cabin. But the atmosphere had changed. Everyone in first class was watching her now, not as someone who didn't belong, but as someone who had just shown what power, grace, and dignity looked like when tested. Maya's narration deepens the moment. It wasn't just about the seats, it wasn't about wealth. It was about sending a message that no one, no matter how entitled, would ever dictate her worth. Her silence had been her shield, but this was her statement. Across the aisle, Patricia sat stiffly, her eyes avoiding contact with Vanessa or anyone else. The air of superiority that had clung to her like expensive perfume now smelled like fear, like shame. She shifted in her seat, fidgeting with her pearls, but no amount of jewelry could hide the fact that she had just been put in her place. Publicly, decisively, and without Vanessa raising her voice once. One of the other passengers leaned over and whispered just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. "Well done." She gave a polite nod, not out of pride but out of quiet acknowledgement. Inside, Vanessa felt a strange calm. This wasn't revenge. It was something deeper. A reclaiming of space, a reminder to herself and everyone watching that dignity cannot be bought or sold. It is demanded and it is earned by refusing to shrink in the face of ignorance. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and Vanessa looked out the window, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the tarmac. She thought briefly of Chloe, of the example she was setting for her daughter, of the message she wanted to leave imprinted on her heart. No one can take from you what you do not hand over willingly. Patricia remained silent for the rest of the boarding process. Her earlier bravado melted into an awkward stillness. The flight attendants moved with renewed energy, perhaps inspired by the quiet storm Vanessa had unleashed. When Julian returned with her water, Vanessa thanked him with the same grace she always carried. He leaned slightly closer, and for what it's worth, you handled that perfectly. People like her, they don't forget moments like this. Vanessa smiled. Neither do I. There was no anger in her chest, not really. What lingered instead was a heavy sadness, the kind that comes when you realize yet again that no amount of success, no title, no wealth is enough to shield you from someone else's prejudice. Vanessa had faced moments like this before, but this one stung differently. It wasn't because of Patricia's words, it was because of what they represented. That even here, in a cabin where every passenger had paid the same premium price, there was still a line drawn between who belonged and who didn't. Vanessa glanced down at her tablet, but her focus was gone. She wasn't thinking about her investor meeting anymore. Her thoughts were drifting to Chloe. How many times in her daughter's life would she have to teach her that the world might try to shrink her, but she must never let it? How many times would Chloe have to walk into a room and prove she deserved to be there? Not because of her brilliance or her talent, but because someone had already decided she didn't. The weight of that thought pressed hard on Vanessa's heart. She reached for her phone, checking it out of habit, though she knew they were thousands of feet in the air. To her surprise, a cued message appeared from Chloe, sent before takeoff. "Good luck, Mommy. I know you'll win. You always do." Vanessa's eyes softened, her lips curving into the faintest smile. That one sentence was all she needed to steady herself again. Chloe was watching her, even from afar, learning how to navigate the world by the example her mother set. Vanessa knew she couldn't afford to falter, not when every decision she made was shaping the foundation of the young girl's future confidence. Maya's narration adds weight to the moment. It wasn't victory that Vanessa felt, not really. It was the quiet burden of knowing that some battles should never have to be fought in the first place. But when they arrive at your door, you fight them not for yourself alone, but for every person who will come after you. Vanessa sipped her water, her hands steady now. Around her, the passengers seemed to have moved on, or at least pretended to. Some scrolled through their phones, others adjusted their seats or called for champagne. But she could feel the quiet glances from time to time, as though her presence now carried a different weight. She wasn't just another passenger anymore. She was the woman who had stood her ground without saying a single cruel word. She thought about Patricia, who hadn't uttered a word since Vanessa's return. The older woman sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the seat in front of her, avoiding Vanessa's gaze. There was no satisfaction in seeing her subdued. Vanessa didn't want to humiliate anyone, But sometimes, people needed to be reminded that respect is not negotiable. As the flight continued, Vanessa leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. Her father's voice echoed in her memory again. You don't have to fight every battle, but when the time comes, don't fight for them to see you. Fight for them to see themselves, for who they really are. That was what this moment was about. Patricia's prejudice had said more about Patricia than it ever would about her. Vanessa's response wasn't just a defense, it was a mirror. The cabin continued its smooth journey through the skies, but the weight of what had unfolded lingered like an unspoken truth. Vanessa sat quietly, her tablet open on her lap, yet her mind wandered beyond this single flight. She thought about how many other people, less fortunate, less empowered, had been forced to shrink under the weight of prejudice, simply because they had no choice. Maya's narration deepens this thought. How many times has this happened when no one was watching? How many passengers, young or old, have been treated like they didn't belong simply because of their skin color, and had no power to fight back? Air travel, often seen as a luxury or symbol of progress, has a long history of subtle discrimination. From stories of passengers being questioned about their seating class, to being mistaken for staff or treated with suspicion, the biases remain deeply embedded. There are countless documented incidents where people of color were pulled aside for no reason, accused of wrongdoing, or denied the basic courtesy extended to others. These aren't isolated events. They are reminders of a deeper problem, a reflection of how prejudice thrives even in the most polished environments. Vanessa's story is unique, not because she faced discrimination, but because she had the means and courage to push back in a way that couldn't be ignored. Not everyone can buy every seat in first class to make a statement. Most people, faced with a situation like Patricia's open hostility, would be forced to quietly endure it, wishing the flight would end sooner. But Vanessa's actions symbolized something bigger. This wasn't about wealth or making a scene, the narration continues. It was about standing up for dignity, not just her own, but for every person who's ever been made to feel like they are less than. The murmurs of the passengers in that cabin weren't just about shock, they were about recognition. They saw a woman draw a line and refused to let it be crossed. For some, it was uncomfortable. For others, it was inspiring. One woman sitting 2 rows back whispered to her husband, "I wish I had that kind of courage, to just not let them win." But what does it say about society that courage is even needed for such basic respect? Why is it, the narration poses, that in 2025, a Black woman's success, money, and achievements are still questioned? Why does she still have to prove that she deserves a seat she's already paid for? And what about those who can't afford to push back, who suffers for every story we never hear about? Vanessa's story resonates because it is both extraordinary and painfully common. While she found a way to turn humiliation into a bold statement, there are millions of others who go unseen, their quiet dignity chipped away, one insult or assumption at a time. This story forces viewers to confront uncomfortable truths, that systemic prejudice doesn't just exist in courtrooms or schools or offices. It's there in casual encounters, in the thinly veiled comments and dismissive attitudes people choose to ignore. This isn't just an airline problem. It's a societal problem. It's in the way certain passengers are addressed with less respect. It's in the way a Black man might be questioned twice for the same boarding pass. Another passenger simply waves through. It's in the way flight attendants sometimes assume a Black passenger in first class is in the wrong section, an assumption that cuts deeper than most realize. Vanessa didn't speak for herself alone. By calmly asserting her right to exist in that space, she became a voice for the countless others who couldn't. The single mother, juggling economy tickets, the young professional boarding with confidence but leaving with humiliation, the teenager who starts to believe maybe they don't belong anywhere. As the narration continues, it poses another powerful question. If Vanessa had remained silent, what would that have taught the people watching? That racism is acceptable as long as it's politely dressed? That you can demean someone and still sit in comfort? Vanessa's response, bold, decisive, and calm, was a reminder that sometimes you have to disrupt the narrative. Sometimes you have to remind people, in no uncertain terms, that your worth is not up for debate. She glanced once more at Patricia, who now sat silently, hands folded in her lap, her earlier arrogance gone. For Vanessa, there was no satisfaction in seeing her subdued. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the dignity that Patricia had tried to take from her with a few cruel words. The flight landed smoothly in Los Angeles, but Vanessa's mind was far from the usual post-flight routine. She stepped off the plane, not as just another passenger, but as someone who had unwillingly become part of a moment that demanded to be remembered. Her quiet defiance in that cabin was not meant to go viral. Yet within hours, fellow passengers had shared fragments of the story online. The applause, the silence of Patricia, and the calm strength of the woman who had refused to be humiliated. By the time Vanessa checked into her hotel, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers flooded her inbox. One message stood out. It was from a young black flight attendant who had seen the story circulating on social media. "Thank you," the message read. "You did what so many of us wish we could do. You reminded them that we belong." Vanessa paused as she read those words. It hit her that this wasn't just about what had happened in first class. It was about a much larger conversation that was long overdue, one that involved policies, training, and the culture of the airline industry as a whole. She had always believed in using her platform to elevate others, and this incident had given her a new purpose. Within days, Vanessa partnered with advocacy groups that focused on racial equity and travel safety. She appeared on national interviews, not with anger, but with grace, explaining exactly what had happened and why it mattered. She wasn't interested in dragging Patricia's name through the mud. She wanted to highlight the systemic issues that allowed people to think this behavior was acceptable. "This isn't about a seat on a plane," she told one interviewer. "It's about dignity. It's about how quickly we forget that every person, no matter their skin color, deserves to feel safe, respected, and seen, especially in spaces they paid to be in." Maya's voice weaves through this part of the story with a tone of reflection and hope. Vanessa's victory wasn't just about money, it was about changing the narrative. She understood that silence may keep the peace for a moment, but it does nothing to challenge the systems that allow prejudice to thrive. So she spoke, not for herself, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. Vanessa took her message further by working with airlines to create racial sensitivity and bias awareness training programs for flight crews and customer service teams. She stressed the importance of treating all passengers equally and understanding how unconscious biases can escalate small situations into humiliating or even dangerous incidents. Her story gained momentum because it wasn't just about confrontation, it was about resolution and reform. People who had faced similar situations found courage in her words. Letters poured in from around the country, from a college student who had been asked if she could afford her business class seat, from an older man who had been ignored in line while others were given priority. Each message reminded Vanessa why she had to keep speaking. What had started as an unpleasant encounter on a single flight had grown into a movement that touched thousands. Vanessa was invited to corporate panels, diversity conferences, and even government hearings about passenger rights. Through it all, she remained grounded, always returning to the same core message: respect isn't optional. Her work didn't just challenge airlines to improve their training, it inspired passengers to speak up when they saw discrimination happen. The story of that one flight had turned into something bigger. A call for every traveler to refuse to be silent when dignity was on the line. Vanessa didn't want to fight that day. She boarded that flight simply to get from one city to another, to prepare for an important meeting that could shape her future. But when she was pushed into a corner, when her very right to exist in a space she had earned was questioned, she made a choice. A choice that echoed beyond that cabin and into the hearts of everyone who would come to hear her story. Her response wasn't loud. She didn't need anger or insults to make her point. Instead, she demonstrated a strength that can't be measured in wealth or status, the strength of refusing to shrink in the face of ignorance. She stood tall, with grace, and in that single, quiet act of buying every seat in first class, She reminded everyone watching that dignity isn't something anyone can give or take away. It's yours when you claim it. There's a powerful truth in what Vanessa did. She didn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for every person who's been told they don't belong, for every traveler who's been made to feel invisible or unworthy. Her actions were not about revenge or showing off wealth. They were about drawing a line, about saying, "You will not define me." Maya's narration deepens the reflection. The world needs more people like Vanessa, people willing to challenge hate, not with anger, but with action. Her story is a reminder that sometimes you don't need to argue with ignorance. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply refusing to let it break you. As the applause of that cabin fades into memory, the question remains for all of us. What would we have done if we were there? Would we have stayed silent? Or would we have stood beside her, adding our voices to hers? These are the moments that test not just individuals, but society itself. Vanessa's story is not just a tale of one flight, it's a call to action for all of us to speak up, to hold systems accountable, and to ensure that respect is non-negotiable. If Vanessa's story moved you, subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your own stories of resilience in the comments below. Where are you watching from? I want to know the countries, the communities, and the voices that stand together in saying enough.